don't need any details.
Yeah.
Are we ready? Third is public meeting to order. So I believe everybody is present. Okay. Beginning with Mr. Denny. And can we stand for the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Maria Alt.
Before I speak, I just wanted to show you all the sign that I held up at the NAACP conference. It says everyone is welcome in this classroom of all different colors. All different colors.
Camera, I think people were wondering about things being held.
Where's the camera?
It's right.
Thank you.
This is the sign that I held up and spoke to 69 News about. Everyone is welcome in the classroom because everyone belongs. You want to hold? Thank you.
Maria, can you wait a moment? We need the camera.
Yeah, no
We got it.
problem. There's no, I just talk. No.
Okay.
Okay. We're good. All right. My name is Maria Alt. I am multiracial, Black, white, Hispanic, and American Indian. I would like to address the conversation that this and our previous school board has had over the past several years about alleged racism in our schools. It is clear to me now more than ever that some members of our current and previous board, and certainly individuals in our community, are intent on seeing systemic racism in our schools where there is none. They are intent in turning any individual act of bullying or even just poor judgment into a major event, discrediting our wonderful schools and dedicated administrators and teachers. The recent event held by the NAACP on our campus regarding allegedly inappropriate use of avatars in Google Classroom is a perfect example. I have not heard or read a single thing that suggests any student was using an avatar of a person of color to harass, bully, intimidate, or even annoy another student. A student of one color having an avatar they like from an online game does not equal racism without a lot more going on. I have not heard or seen anything that suggests there was any racial animus involved at all. And yet, the first impulse of some is to run to the NAACP, resulting in a press conference on Southern Lehigh School District property. I attended that press conference, which most of us learned about at the very last minute because we obviously weren't in on the planning. Given the attendees and their signs they held, including the obviously political "You Belong" sign, this was obviously a well-organized partisan event. I spoke directly with Ms. Esther Lee, president of the Bethlehem NAACP. She claimed that there has been all this racism going on in our schools, but when 69 News asked which school, Ms. Lee said, and I quote, "I don't know." Respectfully, she has no idea what goes on in the Southern Lehigh schools and was just being used as a prop to make an untrue point about our schools. Because I nicely asked questions to the people in the You Belong campaign at the event, trying to get to the root of the issues, I was called a racist. When I asked them how I am racist, they had no answer and they refused to speak to me because they said, and I quote, "You're disgusting." You should ask yourself, when you've gone wrong, when you're calling multiracial people like me racist for asking questions and having a different viewpoint. This is how the You Belong group treated a community member of color that doesn't share exactly the same view. We're all Southern Lehigh, but only if you conform to their viewpoint. This sign is political and obviously does not mean what it allegedly promotes. It should be removed from our schools immediately. For people who want to see racism everywhere they look, they will see it, whether it's there or not. Thank you.
Amy Boucher.
Good evening. 2 weeks ago, I stood here and asked the board if they were aware of teachers not being replaced and our on-the-road driver's education program being cut. I spoke about a frustration that we have already not replaced secretaries, custodians, technology personnel, and instructional assistants. I discussed the fact that for 20 years, we have listened to budget presentations with dire predictions of draining our fund balance down to zero, and yet those projections have never come to fruition. I know some felt that I was embellishing facts or making a negative statement directed at central administration. I was not. I was simply pointing out some very real ramifications about decisions being made not in the best interest of our students. I also pointed out that I have had very open, honest, and cordial conversations with Dr. Mayen, Dr. Trinkle, and Mr. Pigeon, and continue to do so. Please know, everything I said 2 weeks ago in public was nothing I hadn't already said numerous times to central administration behind closed doors, and it was nothing that I did not say again to Dr. Mayen and Dr. Trinkle at central office on Tuesday afternoon after that board meeting. There seemed to be some confusion as to why, 2 weeks ago, I was standing at this podium so adamantly discussing the negative impact these budget decisions would have on our students since the board had not yet discussed and voted on the 2022-23 budget. I told Dr. Mayen and Dr. Trinkle that I would gladly clear up any misconceptions, so here are the chain of events. 1 week prior to speaking on April 11th, the directive from central administration was given for staff to move forward with the schedule for the 2022-23 school year that eliminated our on-the-road driver's education program and would not replace some teachers leaving the district. Administration was told they could inform staff of the changes to next year's schedule, so from our perspective as SLEA, the decisions were already made. When a staff is told to build one schedule, a schedule that eliminates a program that has previously been offered by this district and does not include preparing sections for teaching positions previously part of the bargaining agreement, it would seem that those cuts were already determined. After asking to speak with Dr. Mayen and Dr. Trinkle after the April 11th board meeting to gain better clarification as to why 2 different messages were being delivered, one to staff and one to the board and the community, they assured me that no final decisions were made. And so that leads us to tonight, and the 9 of you being presented with the preliminary budget for the 22-23 school year. Since the budget cuts have not yet been determined, we will continue to advocate for the students in this district and ask you to truly consider what is in their best interest. Our thoughts from 2 weeks ago have not changed. Not replacing teachers, increasing class sizes, and eliminating programs offers not one benefit to our students. We are proud of our students and staff and the many accolades our district has earned over the years. We are asking the board to maintain the staffing and programs necessary to continue to provide these outstanding opportunities to our students and the excellence of education our community has come to expect. Thank you for your time.
Krista Laverty.
Hi, my name is Christy Laverty. I have a daughter in 2nd grade at Libertyville, and I have a 2-year-old son. I came to speak to you tonight before you consider budget planning because the last meeting that planned to reduce teaching positions was mentioned. I'd like to voice my support for staff members that preserve appropriate class sizes and improve teacher schedules. With simple observation and basic math, I can see that Libertyville will need another 3rd grade teacher if my child's class size is going to remain the same. Of course, a teacher could move up with their class, but that only moves the burden of larger class sizes one to another grade. Any educator will tell you that appropriate class sizes are critical to successful learning environments. As our community grows, our district will grow too. And we need to be ready to provide students with the same optimal learning environments that have defined Southern Lehigh for decades. It's not difficult to find extensive research on why smaller class sizes always result in more learning and better outcomes. Larger class sizes and less support staff don't just reduce learning, they place additional burdens on teachers as they try to compensate for their missing coworkers. Already, many teachers have insufficient time to organize for their next class or even use the bathroom. I've witnessed dedicated teachers giving up their prep time, lunchtime, and even outside of the school day to make critical learning tasks happen like guided reading groups and assessments when resources were limited. The teaching profession is facing a staffing shortage, and there are plenty of opportunities in nearby districts. With the challenges faced by teachers over the last 2 years, why should we give them any more reasons to leave us? I believe we have excellent teachers in this district. I listen to board meetings often, and I hear that most in this administration deserve supportive working environments. We will not create those things by refusing to adequately staff our schools. We need to remember that our teachers' work environment is our children's learning environment. If we want them to deliver the best for our kids, we need to give our best to our teachers and our staff. Reducing staff does not result in savings when it creates a domino effect of employee turnover and harms student achievement. We need to make sure that our classrooms are not just places that future Southern Lehigh families want their children to learn in, but where the best and most qualified teachers want to be teaching. As we budget for our resources, I hope you remember that our most critical resource is human. Thank you.
Nicole Dolan.
Hello. As you review and later vote on our district's budget, I urge you to maintain our district's teaching staff and support at the levels we've had. Southern Lehigh School District has been known for being great. And when things are going well, it's important to look at why, so that they continue to go well. I don't think I'm the only one who's had this experience where you're out in the freezing on a cold day and your kids say, "Can I take off my coat?" And you say to them, "No, it's cold out." And of course they say, "But I'm not cold." Well, the reason why they're not cold is because they have their coat on. As soon as they took their coat off, they would get cold. So why has our district been known for being so great? Mainly because of our amazing teachers. Why are we so blessed to have amazing teachers here who want to come work here and stay here? Why are our teachers able to get such great results in the classrooms? Why do we have so many who take initiative to provide extra opportunities for their students? I believe it's because historically they've been supported here. We prioritize having enough staff for them to have manageable class sizes. When they want to introduce and run special programs, we encourage that initiative by supporting their efforts. We have enough support staff for them to be able to have the breaks and planning time that they need. They are surrounded by colleagues who are just as amazing as they are, and great teachers who aren't here yet want to, because they see that we have a recipe for success here. All of this makes for a positive feedback loop. But as soon as we take it for granted that we're just a great district, we'll lose what makes us so. Letting our staff numbers naturally dwindle without replacing them, or without hiring even more as the district grows, would be like shedding our coat on a freezing winter day. We'd be giving up what is keeping us warm. Classroom sizes will increase, and plenty of studies show that that will lead to performance decreasing. The great teachers we have might not stay as long as they would have otherwise. The great teachers that don't work here yet might not try to get a job here if they see a recipe for failure. Rather than a positive feedback loop, we'll find ourselves in a downward spiral. Whether you see the situation as problematic as I do, there is a simple truth that can't be ignored. Amazing teachers can work anywhere they want. Let's make sure we keep the Southern Lehigh District a place they want to be. Our kids and our community deserve it. Thank you.
Okay, folks.
For the Solicitors Report, there was an executive session this evening at 6 o'clock to cover personnel and litigation matters. That was the only report.
So we have minutes from March 28th, our board meeting, and workshop minutes from April 11th for approval. I have a motion. Any comments or any questions?
I'd like to acknowledge Ann in providing accurate notes, even to the point at which when I recorded restroom break was there. They have a detail in there. It's important in notes.
I'm gonna second that. Thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Minutes are approved. So with that, we have a facility update, Dr. Mann.
Thank you. On the facility report, I have it broken into two parts. First is our stadium project, and the second is just a major maintenance effort going on across the district. I want to thank first and foremost, the facility committee for the very hard work they have been devoting to both of these issues. With respect to the stadium project, the permit approval is entering the final stages of Upper Stockton Township. So good progress is being made there. We received a letter today from the Conservation District, which is now beginning its 10-day review of our submittals. So we're in good shape. That process is likely to be a long one, but it's off to a very good start with an acknowledgement that we received today. Regarding the construction itself, in recent weeks, I've had the opportunity to meet with several cooperative purchasing vendors. These include Field Turf, Shaw Turf, Keystone Sports Construction, Deluxe Athletic, and A-Turf. Our purpose is to encourage interest, to talk about our project with these vendors in the hopes that they would respond to our request for proposal and make it a more competitive, advantageous process when it comes down to our selecting those vendors. And that formal RFP is likely to be issued the first week in May. So we can anticipate that going down the first week of May in the hopes that some of these vendors and others will be expressing an interest in competing for that work. And then with respect to the major maintenance, prioritized list of projects are being developed following extensive building reviews. I want to commend Mr. Pepe for his work. He has really had together a detailed spreadsheet of lists, which we intend to continue to expand. This list includes a number of roofs. HVAC is also a common theme. I do want to call to the board's attention that in the process of this analysis, some concerns have been raised about the brick facing at the intermediate school. So that will also be a topic for further investigation as we review this comprehensive list. And finally, I want to note that at our last meeting, we had a speaker talk about the nurse's office in the high school bathroom. Very important topic. I'm pleased to say that over the summer, that will be something we will be able to take on and rectify that problem. And so that concludes my report on facilities.
I just have a question. The brick facade on the intermediate school, I don't know what you guys discussed in the committee, but I know that before Todd Berge left, he had done extensive work on that, and there was a lot of back and forth between the contractor or the supplier or who was responsible. And I don't remember, and I don't know if there was ever any kind of an agreement met, but I would assume that there would be a lot of paperwork about that. I know Todd had been very diligently working on that before he left.
Yes, and we are researching all of that, and we're compiling files. And again, I just throw it out as a matter of notice, something that was unanticipated, came to our attention, and we are now reviewing it very, very carefully. We'll have future reports on progress for sure. But yes, we are aware of some records, and as we find a single record, oftentimes that leads us to another one. It's very good.
I had a couple of questions. Thank you so much for addressing the nursing bathroom at the high school. What is I know we've mentioned it before, but it's been some time, the difference in cost between a grass field and a turf field? Again, do we kind of offhand, do you remember, Phil?
Don't hold me to this, but if I recall from the August presentation that was done by Architera, I want to say it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $350,000 to $400,000 was the difference. Because the grass field and or a turf field, one of the key things that's going to change between what we have now and what we will have is the drainage system. It is something that will be installed. And regardless of the surface that is above it, with variation, you're going to need to have that in place. And if you go with a turf grass, that has the right structure to be durable and to be sustained, not what we traditionally have had, there's an additional cost there. And there's also a cost for upkeep
Right.
on an annual basis with cutting.
With grass,
treating,
right. So the thought was, from what I remember, was that there's a savings in the end, To some degree,
Well,
right? Like the
it's-
investment at the front end is greater for turf as opposed to grass, but because of maintenance and issues that we've seen in the past with grass, it was thought that turf would be a better fit.
It's a better option, but more importantly, it lets the stadium be a primary field that will be used by all of the appropriate teams at any time.
Right, because it allows more use.
More use. So
Right.
you've got your practices, you've got your games, where historically, we've been limited to 24 events or less per year.
Right. I mean, so my question again, Mike, I know you were very helpful and you got information from Architera for us with respect to my concerns regarding turf and the crumble. And I did look more into it. And I know you'd spoken to my point and my concerns last time, Bill, which I appreciate. But I admittedly, I did some of my own review as well. I mean, the EPA did open up research into the subject as well, because they're thinking at this point, which is understandable, is that there's not enough data really, because it's hard to tell. There's too many other factors, but certainly there was more to it. It appears than just the gloves, because it wasn't just goalies that were impacted with respect to lymphoma. So and there's been a number of studies since in California, for example, that reviewed it. So Mike, what I want to know, since the RFPs are going out, I don't know if there's any variability with respect to the amount of, because the area of concern is the crumble. I'm not worried about injuries. I understand that part's been addressed, I think, to my satisfaction, but it's the crumble portion, the loose, the fill, it's the tire crumble, and it's known to be toxic. But the question is the amounts, the exposure, how loose it is, embeddedness, inhalation, ingestion, that type of thing. So I'm sure there is some variability, I would imagine, amongst companies. So that would be something I'd like to know more about. I'm not against turf. I understand the benefits of it, but I just, I feel better, I think, as with some community members who have actually asked me about it too.
Yes, no, it's an excellent question. That I'm not going to be answering its entirety, but I have one tidbit that might be helpful in that as I'm talking to each of these vendors, they talk about a density. And while they're not going to talk about it with respect to toxicity, what I have drawn from it is that there are varying types of gauges, that's not the word, but it's what I have right now, of field that we could certainly discuss once we start to talk about the specifics with respect to any toxicity. Now, I think
Because
that
I'm sure that would impact drainage, right? Like how tight it is versus,
So
how
there's a
loose
couple of
the fill.
things that from a toxicity, but even taking that out of the equation, the fill determines the lifespan of the fill. And if it's not done correctly, the field's gonna prematurely age and you're gonna have to replace it sooner than really the 12 to 14-year time frame that any quality field should be able to last and be used for that period of time. The other aspect is the grooming of the field. Once it is in, it's gotta constantly, you've gotta move those around and keep them even. But that said, going back, this is 10 years now, there's a process that field turf uses, and it gets compaction. And one of the key things when you're at a field like this, and you can tell that there's a potential issue with both the maintenance and or how the field was put in, is you see the trail when a person moves, and you see it kick up into the air. That should not happen. And I think that also leads to those fibers, the material, being more readily available for people to inhale or to, whatever.
So is there
So-
data on these individual firms that we're considering with
Well,
respect to RFPs? Because, that's really.
That will be part of the process.
Here's what I would say. That independently, just as I'm Googling really, I've not been able to find anything, as we were both doing the same thing, it's hard to find anything definitive. Now, I've raised the issue with each of the groups that I've spoken with. To no one's surprise, they're not so, yes, this is toxic what we're selling, but they all are pointing toward the same set of studies and information that indicate that it is not a problem. And so, given that I'm at a bit of a standstill as far as advancing
Well,
the.
that's what they're gonna show you.
Well, exactly, no, right, and they point to independent studies and research.
Give me a lot.
But on my own, I have not been able to contradict anything that they are, conveying. So, and of course, our architect, who is actually supposed to be independent as our representative, has given us information that says that toxicity is really not an issue. So I will acknowledge that those are not necessarily completely independent sources of information, but I've also not been able to find something that would allow me to confront them on what they are saying.
Yeah, it's not hard to ask one way or the other. I think there's still questions.
Well, to me,
You're always kind of poking, I think, but
to me, what resonates is NutraSweet. You look at all the studies that show NutraSweet is safe, they were funded by GD Serum, who found NutraSweet. So, yeah, they're gonna say they're safe. So it's a matter of looking at these studies and who conducted it, who paid for it, and what's the link with the study.
right,
And
and the
I think
problem
in
is
the
there
end-
wasn't, there's probably been changes with, there's too much variability probably with respect to the fields themselves with the aspects that you're mentioning, so that's the problem.
And even what the field's constructed over
Yeah.
has to matter.
I would feel better if I exhausted that. I understand.
And Bill, also, I think, the environment plays a big role as well, so indoor facilities versus outdoor facilities, the climate, all that, I know that's big, yeah.
So we're
Right,
gonna
and-
have a high level of use.
We're gonna have a high level of use, but we're not building over a super fund site.
Right, so I would wanna make sure it's pretty.
It's also an individual's level of use, right? So if I'm worried about my son playing lacrosse, depending on how often he's on that field, that's gonna be determining his risk potentially.
And the other issue, not to even comment anymore, but one of the things that was raised in my conversations is, look, you're gonna put fertilizer and weed killer and a number of other treatments on a natural field, and that those themselves can be problematic, particularly if they're misapplied or applied in too much. So I'm fearful we're gonna have not a clear answer beyond just a separate.
I'm not asking for a clear answer, I don't think we're gonna have one. Really what I'm asking for is whatever information we can get that might impact the safety of it would be helpful, like what you're saying, with, how much it gets kicked up, how tight it is, and I would say the bill, like the density.
And
That's all.
It's
Really.
also, you don't have to have, and you should not have 100% tire fill.
Correct.
It's a way of
Because that's
silica,
what's
fill, and so on.
And you can achieve the proper QMAC, which is what we require.
Correct. Yeah, and that, again, that has to be part of our discussion with any vendor that we're entertaining. And they give us the best opinion that they can provide. And then we see what other alternative sources of information out there that may contradict it.
And one
make an
final
informed
point.
decision.
One final point. One of the good things about the approach we're taking with respect to the performance contracting is that we're not left with the lowest bidder.
Correct.
We are, of these groups, all of them are this is what they do all the time, to point to many, many different projects they have completed. So my sense is that they will be, industry standard, doing it right, because we will be able to select ones that are really good at it.
What I want to say overall to both you, Ruth, and to Mike and your staffs, as I think about the IS school, and from the time I've come on this board, we've been dealing with that brick issue, and it's still not resolved. And I know that every day you're finding additional pieces of information going back and now putting the pieces of the puzzle of where we are today together based upon all of the different touch points that the past administrators had, which ultimately had no solution that rectified the issue because we're still dealing with it. I very much appreciate what you're doing. And I also know that to the best of your ability, we will get to a solution finally. Because I get the sense that when you report out to us and when we have discussions, that you're on it in a much different way than your predecessor. So thank you for that.
Just comments regarding facilities.
Yeah, I'll just
Facility committee.
tag on a little bit to Mr. Lai said, and I want to acknowledge
in this meeting or work on the 5-year plan for facilities and getting the priority list together. We had a preview of that at the committee meeting, and I have to say it was extensive, and you had it set up in a structured and flexible way to discern and filter out different information so that we can get a clear handle on these items throughout the entire facility set in the school district. So I appreciate that, and I just wanted to commend you on that. And then just secondly, I want to reiterate the ADA bathroom issue. You know, we talked about that as well, and diligence is where we need to be with it, and you're moving on it. So I just wanted to commend you on all that work, you and your staff and everybody in the administration working on that.
I think there was just one more update, which was the roofs as well. I believe you've already done a preliminary analysis for three of the roofs.
That's
As
correct.
well.
We're in the process of looking at all of the. Okay, we're in the process of doing the roof survey that we had promised the board we were going to undertake, and Michael Warback, our new facilities director, myself, and one of the maintenance members who has done extensive work with roofing issues, we started with the 3 largest schools. We did the high school, the middle school, and the intermediate school. We also walked with a roofing manufacturer who is a roof specialist, and he had done core samples so that we could look down to the decking to see the composite makeup and look for various issues. Took a lot of pictures. We're also going to move forward with the infrared scan analysis of all of the roofs, new and or old, so that we can verify what's in between the layers at the top and the actual decking. Especially in this environment, we certainly do not want to replace any isoboard insulation that's in good shape, because supplies are limited and expensive and extenuous long lead times. The manufacturer rep that we're currently working with is going to come back to do the 2 elementary schools and our administrative building. And we expect to have all of that completed. We'd like to be able to report back by May. And I'm thinking off the top of my head, May 17th. And, we should have a better handle on where everything is at that point. And then we're simply going to prioritize and rank the projects and be able to put scope as far as value to what needs to be done and what's, the highest impact areas that we need to look at right away. What roofs are in good condition. We're also looking, and Michael Warback and his team are looking at warranty information on existing roofs. And we're going to be able to report back in a clear, comprehensive way, what type of roofs are we looking at, what is the current condition of those roofs, when were they installed, when is the warranty, what is the recommendation as far as moving forward, and hopefully we'll have, good information to report back on.
Thank you for that. I think it's really important that the board, recognize that there's some concern, I think, from the facilities committee that there could be some pretty expensive repairs needed in the very near future. So I think it's important to recognize that, to keep that in the back of our minds as we talk about our budget and spending down a fund, potentially spending down a fund balance that may be needed or will be needed for some potential expensive repairs. And we don't know how much it's going to cost, but pretty significant.
Yeah, and in the short term, as Mr. Pepe is putting together that priority list, there will be number 1s on the list that need to be addressed in general, and so that we maintain the longevity of the facilities. And it will be critical to get those done as that priority list dictates. And thus, Madam President, is the reason why we have a facilities committee.
Yes, I want to remind everybody that the facilities committee is a public committee, so you can attend those meetings and listen in. The agenda is published and the dates for those meetings are published if you have information or want to participate. We have public comments prior to.
Or no?
No, there are no public comments. And participate to get more detail outside of this board meeting.
And without looking at calendar, it's the 1st and 3rd Tuesday of each month are the dates.
At 6 p.m.
At 6:30 p.m. And we've been meeting here in the board room most recently.
And
reports that Mr. Pepe, I know we've had a lot of change. Wow, my mic is really loud to my own ears, so I apologize. It is working. I'm not complaining, Mr. Leslie. Yes, you're right. But I want to commend Mr. Pepe and his team for the reports and all of the work that has gone in. And we've had a lot of different roles. I know Mr. Lysette mentioned a predecessor, and his predecessor did not have the same roles that he now has, but we appreciate him taking on that additional responsibility. And there's a lot of good information in those meetings, and I've appreciated being able to attend. Just two quick comments for the board's consideration and committee's consideration going forward, which are: one, there are no public comments allowed at the beginning and the end currently, but that's something that if there is interest, the board or the committee could choose to change. I know Ms. Reinhardt had mentioned that when she was going to establish committees, that transparency and the public being able to ask questions is great. So it's something to maybe consider in the future if there's a desire for that. And my other question was if there was ever, since they are being held in the boardroom, if there was consideration of broadcasting them like we do those meetings, since the community is really invested in its facilities and the big changes. And Dr. Wayap mentioned that there are going to have to be some significant consideration and budgetary considerations. It might be great for the community to be able to tune in on those as well. Just a suggestion for transparency and keeping our public up to date with those, because there have been some really robust and great conversations in those. Just for everyone's consideration, both adding comment and adding the ability to see it for folks who can't make that meeting but are really invested, just like these. Thanks.
All right, let's move on to budget planning.
Yes, thank you. And I just distributed before our meeting sheet. My hope is tonight to have an engaging conversation with the board so that administration can glean some information and get the board's guidance and the board's wisdom as we move to provide the board with a preliminary budget in our first meeting in May. And while I did try to organize some topics, I want to be very clear. We can talk whatever, we don't have to follow this sheet, but I just thought it might be a way for us to kind of process report information. So I'll begin by going through, but if there's comments and discussion, or you need to go off the sheet, by all means. This was just kind of my effort to frame the conversation. So as far as the timeline, we will present to the board a final budget on June 27th. We must have a budget in place approved by July 1st. So we have plenty of time between now and the final budget to work through to get an excellent document together. We will present a preliminary budget at our next meeting on May 9th. We would expect to be able to vote on that budget, and it's necessary to have a 30-day wait period. And the important thing also to note is that the board can make any changes it wishes between the preliminary and the final budget. So if to use an extreme example, on the night before, June 27th, if we need to make changes, we certainly can. So that's just the timeline. And so under number 2, tonight's discussion will help inform administration as we prepare our budget. Ideally, we would like to leave tonight with an established millage rate and a sense of what positions, if any, will be eliminated. We have until June to make changes. No decisions we make tonight will be fine. And so, as far as where to begin, at least financially, I thought where we are. And that is to say that if no taxes are raised and no positions are cut, the projected deficit for 22-23 is $3.3 million. And that was well contained in Mr. Pepe's presentation at our last meeting. If projections are accurate, our fund balance, currently at about $13 million, will be reduced by this amount, that is to say $3.3 million by the end of 22-23. That puts it where we are. Now, staffing is the largest driver of our expenses. It also is our greatest asset, our staff. But I do want to, by the way, acknowledge Mrs. Boucher's meetings. Some of the most productive, best, and actually enjoyable meetings of the month. We have the opportunity to meet with our association. The conversations are excellent. I learn from them every single time, and I very much am grateful for the partnership she and the union has shown in their efforts with us. So But because it is such a large percentage of our budget, to make meaningful progress in addressing budgetary imbalances, staffing must always be a consideration. So the district, because of its current fund balance, has sufficient time to be strategic in its examination of staffing. And even in challenging budget times, there are instances where staffing should be increased. Right? So I want to begin by talking about possible demands where staffing could be increased. And that is to say, instructional outcomes in many ways are most critical at our earliest grades, that is K through 3. Currently, class sizes are high at some of these grade levels in both of our elementary buildings. I think that was referenced by a speaker earlier. And I'm suggesting that regardless of budget implications, that we add an elementary teacher if we learn sufficiently in advance of the start of the school year that class size will exceed 26 students. Now, administration will adjust staffing across buildings and grade levels to avoid the need for additional staffing, but it is very conceivable that numbers would rise. And in such a case, regardless of what the budget is approved, I think that we would, administration would at least recommend that we add a teacher in those circumstances, K through 3, if class sizes exceed 26. So I'll pause just to see.
Do we know how close we are to that number, that 26? I know you'd have to shuffle and there's cross coverage that can be done, but.
Right, and we are getting close. I think it's in third grade at both. Mr. Mansfield's third grade at both Hopewell and Lehigh.
It would be next year's third grade.
Next year's, correct, next year's third grade. And so, if nothing changed at the moment, we would not find that necessary, but if over the summer, as often happens, we have enrollments, it may become necessary for us to make that change.
So as it currently stands, we would need to shift current staff.
Right.
over to this thing.
That we will do, but to add additional staff, we would end up, after all the changes, having a class that has more than 26.
Is it fair to, thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Manfield, I can't see you, but thank you for being here, even though I can't see you, I hear your voice back, but there you are, thanks, appreciate it. Can I assume that this current budget that you're proposing does not include that position?
It does not, because
We don't know that we need it. Sure.
But I think it's important to at least suggest to the board that administration will not be restrained when it comes to hiring an additional staff member should such a need arise at that level.
Okay, thanks. And and you can't predict, and if it happens very late in the game, late in August, obviously those classrooms are set and the kids are in those rooms, and it would be more harmful to reshuffle and hire somebody and try to get somebody in September than to just leave everyone as is. So my other question would be, if that does end up happening late in the game, as it were, August, September timing, and another elementary staff person cannot be, hired in time, or it doesn't make sense to do so with the timing, is there a possibility of providing additional supports, perhaps from an aid perspective in those classrooms, to kind of not diminish class size, but to give an extra set of hands on a rotational basis for, say, reading or math or something like that, perhaps could be considered? It's no substitute for class size, but it does give teachers an extra set of hands when they're trying to do intensive learning at those young ages in core subjects.
And I thank you for noticing my hedge sufficiently in advance to start the school year. So
Yes,
thank you for noticing that. And what I would say is that, yes, we would staff based upon need. Now, whether it's adding additional aid or recognizing that there may be a class that has very small class sizes, or we can kind of shift some staff within the building. So I would be disingenuous for me to say that it's an easy barrier to hire an additional staff person regardless of the work. But we recognize that where there are needs, we need to have staffing. And that would certainly be something we would consider for a class size of 26. And it may be that a smaller class size with students with particular needs would have more aids or support than a larger class size that would be differently controlled.
Sure, and I appreciate that individualized approach, what's based on student need. Thank you for, and teacher need in the classroom as identified. Thanks.
Dr. Mahone, just quickly, could you give us a refresher on the percentage of the total budget that is, let's say, non-personnel versus personnel, I guess would be the way to put that?
Staffing is about 70%. We take benefits and salary and all the associated costs. So about 70% of our budget is is staff. Now, I will tell you, while that seems like a large number, I would actually like to see it higher, because the instructional staff is that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, where our students are engaging with staff. By virtue of the fact that it's not 75%, it suggests to me, and I haven't reviewed this as thoroughly as I will, that we're spending more money on non-instructional activities than perhaps we should. And so there's some areas where we would like to be able to streamline our operation in order to focus more percentage-wise of our budget on instruction.
And then how much out of the rest of that is, let's say, the fixed costs, facilities and whatnot?
Mr. Moore, I appreciate the question. You have no room to do anything. I guess, we often tease Dr. Trinkle, her curriculum budget is 1% of our total. And so if we cut her by 50%, we've cut a 0.5% of the budget. So much of what we do is related to facilities and staffing and statutory or contractual that we are really left to look not only, but largely at staffing when we run into budget crunches such as we are.
I have a question. It says that our current fund balance is approximately 13 million. And I do recall many conversations with different administrators that a healthy, good fund balance would not go much higher than about 8 million. That a healthy fund, because you don't want a fund balance that's too high either. And at 13 million, that's a very healthy fund balance. And reducing it by the $3.3 million here, if we didn't raise taxes and we didn't cut positions, would take us down to approximately 10 million, which is still a very healthy fund balance that may be high. I do understand we have other things coming down the pike that we may need to use that money for, but it does still seem like a very healthy, high fund balance.
And let me offer a thought. And sometimes people say you have to hit the 8%. I think you're referring to the 8% of unrestricted fund balance.
No, actually, it was I remember it was a conversation with Hannah.
Right.
And I remember we had specifically asked her, where should we be? And she said that for a good, healthy fund balance, her recommendation, if I'm not mistaken, was about 8 million.
But that's based upon a recommendation of a percentage of your operating budget, which is, I think, what you were going to speak to.
Right, and here is the big challenge. I will be the first to say, a public school district should not be a bank. The money should be in the pockets of the taxpayers, not in the reserves of the district. And so I will wholeheartedly agree that we should not have more fund balance than we need. I've heard here that one of the strategies was to bring down the fund balance to a certain level. And what I will tell you is that there are real strategies to do so. And that would be to, for example, shift money from a surplus at the end of the year, for example, instead of unrestricted, over to a capital reserve project or fund, and then to use that on ongoing maintenance like roofs and HVAC and all that. Perfect sense. One-time expenditures for one-time projects makes good sense, right? Another way to utilize the fund balance, to bring the fund balance down, would be to defease debt, not just restructure debt, but actually defease debt, pay off some bonds. One-time expenditures for a one-time purpose, and that would strengthen the district's financial position. It would reduce the operational cost of servicing debt, and it would allow the district in the future to be in a better position to borrow. So there are very real and appropriate strategies that can be used to diminish fund balance, and I would be all for them. However, we are not in a position to be able to defease debt. We are not in a position to be able to put money into capital reserve, although it's sorely needed because of projects that have not been completed. Rather, we are now faced with operational deficits. And when we decide to utilize fund balance to cover differences in operational deficits, there is no way, short of raising taxes or doing massive cuts, to pull out of such a dime. And so while I would be completely in favor of being able to reduce a fund balance, given other criteria being in place, I can say for absolute certain that none of those criteria are in place to allow us to make such decisions, which is why I'm very worried about the utilization of fund balance to plug temporary gaps in operational expenses, which are likely to recur and actually become exacerbated over time.
For example,
Can I follow up on
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Part of that conversation. You know, as the business administrator now, I can tell you that 5.6 million would be your 8%, and that sounds really good if you're only looking at a balanced budget, but you don't have a balanced budget. That's the first concerning thing. Second of all, we have to look at the facility issues, not of what we would like to do, but what we have to do, what we need to address as far as roofing, as far as the brick issue that we were talking about, as far as HVAC and other things that do come up. So when I look at operational management and cash flow and planning, I'm not looking at 1 year, I'm looking long term. And over the 5 year, having a healthy capital reserve, a maintenance reserve, an emergency reserve gives you that ability. Everything that we put against the budget is simply adding a revenue that we have to make up the following year because we started zero. So the more money that we put against the expenditures from utilization of fund balance puts us right back in the same boat coming the following year. That's why when you looked at the projections, I had a balanced budget, I think 2026. And I think and I did speak with Hannah in preparation for what she was looking at. We were both in agreement. So I think, as Dr. Mann finishes his, update, I'll give you a little more color to it. But I certainly wanted to bump the room or the thought that, we should definitely get down to 8% at this point because we're not even balanced in our budget. Okay, so I just think that's information you need to know.
and to be clear, in the previous budgets, as far as emergency funds for facility improvements or things that are not improvements, but repairs, has that been included as a standard budget item in the past?
Yeah, well, with the exception of last year, we've been running budget deficits. So rather than taking a small surplus, which we would actually hope to expect, because every year there's a capital problem. We have many buildings, many facilities. We should have a capital and a major maintenance account budgeted with actual money that then we would then accumulate over time and draw down in line with planned projects. We have, far from that, we have been actually drawing down the fund balance and not putting money into major maintenance accounts or capital reserve accounts, which actually makes it worse because not only are we finishing with a deficit, whatever issues and deterioration or depreciation of assets occur during the course of the year, we're not accounting for that in our budget. And so it's kind of a double hit the way that it's been going. This is the reality. Many places have those problems, but that's one that we have to be very careful about not addressing because fiscal challenges left unaddressed only get worse.
Absolutely.
And then again, this goes back to your facility 5-year plan and prioritization of those items so that we can get some sort of a projection and strategy together, at least get in the ballpark of where we're headed with these things over time, right?
Especially with, interest rates starting to go up. It certainly gives us more flexibility in having the ability to use capital reserve to cover certain things like roof rather than going out to bond it. And it's an immediate need. And if we have a healthy balance, then we can go after projects like that instead of having to take a bank loan or bond. If not, we're gonna just find ourselves adding more to load, which will impact future budgets as we're budgeting the principal and interest payments.
Lou, can you just comment real quick? I remember at the last meeting, you had mentioned the increasing costs or the increasing budget deficit. Nothing was done. Nothing was done. It's $3.3 last year it was over 4 million. I mean, in just a few years, it was well over $5 million pretty quickly.
Yeah,
You know, so that just, you know, for the community, our costs are increasing.
yeah, it has a continuing impact, and that's why, you know, and I certainly don't want to steal your thunder there, Dr. Mann, but I know we've been back and forth, we talk a lot, trust me. That's the way things get done. One of the things that we were looking at is when I had put the budget projection forward in the recommendation of 3%, that was if there's no reductions in the spend. And as I said, currently, you know, the revenues do not support the expense. So either we look at making cuts in the budget, and the reality is the only real money to move in a budget that's meaningful is going to be salaries and benefits at this point based on the percentage of the impact, and or utilizing the increase in taxes on the millage rate, or a combination. And I think that that's more where we're trying to come from tonight, and I'm gonna let Dr. Mann finish with his presentation, and I think you're gonna find that that's a more appetizing solution to where we are currently. And it's still not gonna get us all the way out of the woods, but it will certainly make a major impact in this year moving forward.
So we're on to 4B now, and I want to actually echo some of the very important thoughts that were said here. We value our teachers. We value the programs that we have here. We value the fact that Southern Lehigh is a very special place, something I've learned and continue to learn every day I work here. I will say though, that other districts around us are experiencing similar challenges. And in order for us to preserve who we are and to maintain a competitive advantage, we have to perhaps make some hard decisions, because absent action, we could be looking at furloughs. Districts very near to us are talking to their staff about you are being furloughed this year. And with respect to programs, for us to maintain our programs and for other districts to maintain their programs, our challenges have to be made. And so we want to preserve this place, because absent action, we will be doing more drastic things like furloughs, like drastic cuts. And our whole hope is to be able to make hard decisions now so we don't have to make impossible decisions in the future. Again, it's the board's decision, and you will evaluate where we are with all of this. But I do want to say that even if our getting to that final point, we take different paths, our motivation is the same, and that is preserving the great quality of education and the great sense of pride that all of us have in our school district.
Could I ask a quick question just to make sure I heard and understood something? In our discussions and our thinking about this, was it fair to say that between what Dr. Mahan and Mr. Pepe both said, that a recommendation of a 3% tax increase would be brought to the board if we were to maintain current staffing levels, but if we were to consider a lesser taxation rate of 3%, the solution would be the staffing needs to be reduced, and those are the recommendations, the reductions that the board has seen? Right, I just heard that point, and I just wanted to see if that was, did I hear that correctly, that analysis?
Let me try to address that. We do not have like a sliding ruler that says I go this far much and then it goes that far down and it keeps it precise. We don't. What I did, speaking only for myself, right, is that I came up with something. And now I think it's the best thing, but that's just me sitting there. And so that's why we need a discussion with our board. To talk about, did we get it right? Are we off on one? Are we off on another? So I don't think it's this or that or the other thing or a particular number, because again, it's a 5-year project now too that we have to look into. And so I would not say that that is my view of it, that one and the other we have to adjust accordingly. That I just tried to put a point that balances a number of different things.
Since staffing is the largest expense.
And how that point flows back and forth is, that's why we have our elected members of our community sitting here tonight to try to work through it. But I also thought it would be wrong for me to say, here's the problem, good luck. Right? I feel an obligation to be in on this in some way. And obviously, if the board feels a different way is better, well, that's great. That's why that's what we'll do. But I did not want, I felt I should have some skin in the game, so to speak, in developing recommendations.
And just for clarification, I did not say that no budget cuts were going to take place. I think at the time, given the information I had, I started at a 0.3%, which was already given to the board the prior year by the prior administration.
Thank you, that makes a lot of sense. No, thank you, appreciate that. No, and you definitely didn't say no cuts.
Right.
Absolutely, thanks. Sorry if I misled and misspoke there. That's why I wanted to understand. Thanks for allowing that.
Oh, sure. So under B, first, I'm claiming that we should not do any involuntary furloughs this year. That things are challenging, but they're not that challenging. We should not be talking about involuntary furloughs, which leaves us to look at whether we fill vacancies or not. Okay. And so we have 5 anticipated vacancies in our professional staff this year. And I am going to recommend that we not fill 3 and that we do fill 2. And so we go top of the second sheet, top of the back here. The 3 positions that I recommend that we do not fill would be a Southern Lehigh High School social studies teacher. Should we not fill that position, class sizes will increase from approximately 21 to approximately 25 students per class. We do think we can mitigate that to some extent by making adjustments to the master schedule, but again, let's not assume that. Let's just say 21 to 25, but we do think that's more of a worst case than it is, but let's leave it there. And then we also think that we can eliminate a middle school social studies teacher. This would increase class sizes from 22 to 29 students, but we also believe that we will be able to reduce this increase in class size by alternating teacher assignments for those individuals who might have some dual certifications there and be able to kind of adjust it that way, but look to see that as certainly an increase in class size for social studies. And then the third position we would recommend eliminating would be a middle school special education teacher. This will result in a teacher being transferred, a current teacher transferred to the middle school from another building where capacity is not nearly as much of a challenge. And so those are the 3 that we would recommend not to be filled.
Can I ask some
Oh, sure.
questions
Yeah.
about, just since we're at that
Yeah.
break point, before you move on?
Yeah.
For number 2, so 22 to 29 is a pretty significant jump, right? Or 21 to 25, not as bad. 22 to 29 is 33%. So that to me seems pretty significant at that age group level. So I guess my question is, when you put in that there's potential mitigation, how likely, I guess, is it? Like, what would that really look like? I know this is worst case scenario. I kind of want to get an idea of what the most likely scenario is, because I think that would help me, because to me, that right there looks pretty significant and a no-go.
And
I also, really quick,
yes,
I know that, one factor, I get that salary and benefits is our largest expenditure. That's clear of any school district. But have you looked at specific salaries? For example, certain individuals that have retired, for example, were more high level and therefore had higher salaries and benefits. So, you could potentially still have a savings by hiring a new teacher that is more junior, for example, and just to kind of throw it out there.
no, that's very, very true. So let me, 2 important points, let me try to address them. First, what I do not want to do is create a rosy scenario and then have people come back and say, well, it was worse. And as our principals look through master schedules, they're very talented at it, and there are ways to reduce funding. It's not an obvious thing, it's adjusting and moving and a process. I think it's very likely that we will not be seeing 29 students in class, and we already have good plans in place to try to address it, but I'm not comfortable enough to sit here and say, well, it's really not 29.
I mean, I I know I can't hold you to a number, and I can understand you not wanting to give me one, but I also want to know how likely that end is, right? Because 22 to 29 is a big range when it comes to class size, right? We already decided that 26 was significant for elementary, and I understand that secondary level education is different, but, coming down later on, I know you're gonna mention which ones you wanna retain, and I understand the significance of those, but to me, social studies is important as well as our other subjects within the district, and it's it helps children understand, some historical data. It also puts, globalization is obviously very important, and understanding where countries are. The geography component, for example, I know was big. So I want to know, how close is it going to be to 29? Are we
Yes,
saying
I
28 is still pretty bad, but
Well, and
like
here's
25,
what
not
I'm
so
saying.
bad. So
Yeah.
where are we going to cut? How
And-
close are we going to get to that 29?
And Dr. What I will tell you is, I actually chose these words carefully because I know such questions are very important. And I try to balance between being overly optimistic, being overly pessimistic, recognizing that there's a certain dynamic in place with how many students want to take what class and all the electives that are involved. So I regret that I'm going to have to stick with the words I have written there. And recognizing that there is ambiguity there that I would like to clarify or eliminate, but I just, at this point in the discussion, the ambiguity I think is going to have to stand where it is.
And was that a consideration, the salary difference that I mentioned?
Well,
Because I know this individual was higher.
Well, you have to be careful of equal opportunity employment and things there, so.
John
be
just
careful
asking,
where
because we're looking at dollars
walking
and
there.
cents.
Here's what we do. When we do that 3.3
It's by
million,
experience too.
right. And what we do is, we've got a 3.3 million thing, right? For example, for the business and the STEM teacher that we're gonna ask to require, we built in the attritional savings. All right? So it's a smaller number, doesn't last as long because they go up and they take classes and all that kind of thing. But, so that is something that we always consider, and it's always a benefit. And the way we kind of think about it is attritional savings, a more senior person, a top scale to a lower scale, accrues to the district. However, column movement, because of college credits, accrues to the employees. So oftentimes those kind of knock each other out. The real value is currently, let's just say that one of these individuals who's retiring is at the top of the scale. We're not replacing them, and that's budgeted this year. And the sum total of all of that, top of the scale teachers, salary, benefits, pension, social security, all of that, actually accrues to the budget. And so, this is also why it's better to do it this way than through furloughs, because when you furlough, you have people usually at the bottom of the scale because it's seniority based, pay unemployment. There's lots of reasons not to do it. So when we do this, we find out where the person is who's retiring. Because if it's a first-year teacher who's leaving, then we would figure out how much money is worth it for that teacher and then put that into the budget. And generally speaking, you're correct. A senior person at the top of the scale creates a greater savings for us, which is why sometimes not replacing people who are retiring is very beneficial.
I just want to take the opportunity, since this is the discussions being had, to thank the teachers and the teachers union and the union representation. We recently renegotiated a contract, and the reason the district is able to realize savings from retirements and use those funds in other ways that we hope we can give back to the teachers and the union, which was the way we tried to structure that agreement. The only reason that we can have this conversation tonight about realizing attritional savings through retirements is because of our teachers union and our teachers agreeing to that compromise looking forward. And I just really want to thank them for their forward thinking and their collaboration and their cooperation and their continued sacrifice. In a time when they have sacrificed so much, they also made that sacrifice. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank them for even allowing our district to be in the position to hopefully use those extra dollars to put back in the classrooms and the kids.
So moving on to then bullet 2 there, as far as filling vacancies, we're recommending that a business teacher vacancy at the high school be filled. The electives are very popular. There's only one other business teacher. To cut that would not only eliminate very popular electives, but also there would be no place for the students to go to take electives. So it really would not be of value. There's a STEM teacher at the middle school. We believe this must be replaced because simply don't have the capacity to assign other teachers to these very valuable science classes. It's very hard for us to go back. And just a note on driver ed. I know that has been a big topic of discussion. People came to the view that it was going to be cut automatically, but we have the equivalent of 2 full-time individuals who are doing this driver ed on the road process. And in addition to the salaries, there is a extra payment for time that they spend tutoring kids or teaching kids on weekends, at nights. I mean, they provide a very valuable service outside of the school day, so there's an extra payment that goes to them because of the great work that they're doing. That extra payment amounts to about $20,000. And it is my thought that with all the students who are served by this opportunity to have on the road, to eliminate that opportunity for the cost of $20,000, we're looking at the cost benefit. This really doesn't check the box in my mind. However, if there was a vacancy that would allow us to transfer a teacher, then by eliminating the program, you end up with the cost of the teacher plus the $20,000. So in such a circumstance, it would be at that point, administration would strongly consider recommending not filling or eliminating the program. But as we sit now, given that the savings is real, but not terribly substantial, we're of the mind that we would not be looking to simply eliminate the program. So maybe I'll stop there. That concludes up to number 4, and see if there's any additional.
Just confused about number 2, I'm sorry.
Number 2?
I thought we already had replaced. Wait, do I get it again?
No, not at all.
Or did we just not account for it?
No, we did. It was a long-term sub.
Okay.
Position, so,
I see.
you know, so really a distinction about too much of a difference, but I thought, just to be precise, I was.
Okay, I didn't realize it was long-term.
Yep.
And just a quick comment on the driver's ed.
Yeah.
Because unless you've gone back through, I think it's probably around 2014, 15, the board entertained the idea of cutting it, and we looked into, there's a program, I think it's LCTI, if I recall correctly, that offers driver's education for a fee of
$180.
How much is
I
it?
think it's $180
Okay.
at the intermediate units.
Right. Yeah, yes, intermediate unit, thanks, Steve. And we decided that that was of value to keep. And I would say before I'd be willing to cut it, I would look at, could we fund it by having parents pay the fees like we do for some other programs? I think that would be a worthwhile investment, and I think parents would probably pay double the 180 to not have to drive, outside of the district to provide that service.
And on the day we come with recommendation to cut the program, we will also have recommendations as to how to mitigate the impact on our people. But fortunately, today is not that day. And so I only raised it because it was a source of keen interest among some, and I just wanted to.
And I would say, based upon what I recall of the discussion back then, a wise decision because you saved your secretaries hours of time on the phone.
Okay, thank you. All right. So that's the first half of it. The second half now comes down to taxation. And so under number 5, property taxes, just as cutting staff is really the only way you affect the expense side. Raising property taxes is one of the only ways to affect the revenue side. It's the only meaningful way a district can increase its revenue. Currently, the district's tax rate is 16.925 mils. I recommend the board consider raising this rate by 0.325 mils, which comes into a little under 2%. Which will generate approximately $935,000 in additional revenue. Now, if you take in combination The staff reduction of 3 positions and the tax increase of 1.9%. The projected deficit is reduced from $3.3 million to $1.9 million, a very real deficit. And I want to very much emphasize letter A underneath. And that is, we are making projections. We're making projections in a year that it's very challenging to make projections. And I think our numbers are on, but I'm not going to sit here and say absolutely no. There is ambiguity to our estimates. And if I were sitting in a board's chair, I'd be saying, well, before I raise taxes a single dime, all right, I want to see what these I want more certainty on these projections. And I thought a lot, long and hard, about that potential objection. And what I would say is that, well, I think we're right. I don't think we're wrong. What I would say for sure is that if we are wrong and somehow we experience a surplus next year because we raise taxes by 0.325 mils, then I know for sure the place to put that surplus is in our capital reserves. Because as sure as night follows day, right, we are underfunded with respect to our projects. And if we are able to run a surplus with a terrible tax increase, because all tax increases are terrible, right, that would actually be profoundly good news for us and necessary news for us. And it would only accelerate what we ultimately have to do. So, you know, the bad news of a poor projection would actually turn into a very, very positive development. And should that occur, we will be at that point. We'd be able to say, transfer fund balance into capital reserve, find debt that's coming due and defease it, and strengthen our balance sheet as we go forward. But I would say that's you know, the outcome of a very bad projection to the good would be that outcome. And then finally, I want to commit to the board that just because we pass a budget does in no way mitigate administration's commitment to ongoing efforts to close the budget deficit by adjusting operations during the fiscal year. We come to work every day thinking, how can we make this a more efficient place? How do we drive value to our students and to our taxpayers? So that concludes my presentation and my recommendation, and I very much look forward to the board deliberating and hopefully giving us a sense as we now go back tomorrow and begin putting together the formal preliminary budget with respect to staffing and the tax rates for us to consider. So thank you.
And thank you for that.
Mr. Pepe or Dr. Mann, can you speak to the mills that's in Lehigh, the rate that we currently are using, in comparison to our peers and our districts around us?
Sure. Currently, of the comparative districts that we look at, and that would be everybody from Catasauqua, East Bend, Northern Lehigh, Northwestern Lehigh, Parkland, Salisbury, Whitehall, Copley, or Copley. We're second to the lowest in our actual mill rate. And actually, the average was 19.38. And the highest in that range was 23.56. And currently we're at 16.93. So even with the recommendation of going up, we would still be in the low 17s. And we would still, even if nobody else raised their rates, we would still be the second lowest.
And Mr. Pepe, Lou, to what extent in the forecast for the coming year are, what historically we call revenue, but it's taxes, in terms of the development that's taking place? So a undeveloped property becoming a developed and taxed at a much higher rate, that increase, and also I believe we get a percentage of the real estate transfer tax comes in. So what impact or what increase would you have coming from those sources forecasted in the budget? And do you feel that it's conservative, or could it be higher based upon how rapidly those homes become available?
Well, I'll start with the transfer tax, because that one's probably the most volatile, depending on the market. If, the market starts to slow down as interest rates go up, especially on mortgages, we could see that revenue go right down. It's been extremely high in the last, 18 months, or the last 2 years, I would say. So in projections, we typically base it on the average of where we are, and we update the average over the last 3 years. So we could, in fact, if the housing market turns around, we could be under budgeted in the revenue area in that particular respect. As far as large additional revenues coming in from support like Wawa, that was already factored in, McDonald's was already factored in. Some of the housing developments that everybody sees that are active and coming up are already factored in. Down the line, things look good. If you remember the presentation, I showed the appreciation of the overall real figure. And as more economic advancement in the southern Lehigh area takes place, that will only mean good things for future budgets. That's one of the things we took into consideration when we came to a final number of recommending put forward. So in total, when you look at the recommendations the superintendent's putting forward, it's not just salary, it's also the benefits, it's also the teacher's pension obligation, it's also life insurance and all the other ancillary costs. That rolls up to about $378,000 of reduction of expenditure. The revenue generated from the recommended 1.92% is closer to 900,000. And if you give me a second, I'll just pull my table up so I can see where we're at. Yeah, that generates $934,000 of revenue as compared to the 3% that I was talking about prior to any cuts would have generated about 1.4. So in the aggregate, we're still in the same ballpark. We're actually still about 146,000 short of where we would be at 3% with no budget reduction. But as Dr. Mann said, budget is a moving document up until the time we finalize. One of the areas I'm very concerned about as far as uncertainty is energy procurement. I've talked and reported out at the meetings on the great price we're paying for diesel. That's through a county cooperative, and the contract term has expired, and yet they were able to get that extended for a couple of months, I think for a 3-month extension. If we have to go out to the market to bid that today, I don't know that it's going to be that favorable. When we look at our energy as far as gas and electric, that represents $631,000 of business, and yet in the comparisons, as Dr. Mann pointed out, it's very difficult because 2020 was not a typical year. So when you look back to average load, it tells a much different story. It's almost like you got to go back to 2019, and now how much am I paying a therm? How much am I paying a kilowatt hour? I reached out to a procurement officer nationally for energy through EnerConnect to see, again, can we analyze that aspect of our business and see, is there any other alternatives where we can hopefully save some money and still not impact delivery of instruction? So I think it's a great question, but I think I've given you enough of that's why we call it forecast. And hopefully we're better than the weatherman. So.
Luke, just not real quick on the transfer tax, I just want to get an idea of the percentage. So what percentage of revenue?
I don't really have a number. So, yeah, it's 1% of the sale. Yeah.
But over the years, we've had some very large commercial properties transfer that have brought in additional money that was not expected. It's been positive. And I think Lou touched upon a concern that I have in the forecast, and we know interest rates are going up. I just heard this morning that the housing market could slow from where it's been, which has been, I don't know that there was a time in my life where it's been as robust as it has been. And
just looking at the numbers, I took that into account. I already had a 30% reduction in the transfer tax.
So you've already pulled back. Because my question was going to be, if we saw a 50% reduction in sales, what impact would that have? But you've already forecasted 30, so it's an additional 20. I can't think that it's gonna be that much that we
No,
can
hopefully
do.
it's- And again, if I'm correct, then we're situated for it. If I'm wrong and it continues to come up, then back to what Dr. Mann said, that would be a positive thing to find out, and we would simply adjust, because, again, remember, as we're trying to lay out a plan for fiscal responsibility over the next 5 years, every budget's gonna impact future budgets. So if we in fact have a great banner year and end up with, excess revenue and/or, have the ability to reduce our expenditures and end up with funds unspent, it will all roll up into a decision of what are we gonna do with that money, whether it goes into budget fund balance against the following subsequent budget and/or put into one of the reserves.
Can you comment real quick on the mills? So I know you had said that average was 19.38, we're looking, we're at 16.9, possibly going up a little bit.
It would be about 17 and a quarter.
So I'm just kind of harkening back to that PSBA training that we had, that mills they're not necessarily comparable across districts. Is that correct?
Let me take a crack at that. Mills are not comparable across county lines because county level ratio assessments are different across counties because county is charged with the assessment. Now, in the case of Lehigh County, I happen to have here Parkland has the lowest tax rate at 15.71. Southern Lehigh is next lowest at 16.92. The next lowest district up from us has a millage of 17.736. So if they maintain their millage and we raise ours by the proposed 3.325, we still would be the second lowest. Now, there's an inherent difficulty in comparing district to district millage because within a different district's boundaries, a mill will appreciate at a different rate. So if there is a district that is fortunate in that there's building out of industry, retirement home, whatever it happens to be, then the value of the mill in that district is the value of dollars that it generates increases without the actual village rate increasing. There's one district we happen to notice that over the time frame 8 or 7, however many it was, their mill actually depreciated. And it's a desperate circumstance, and not surprisingly, their taxation rates, their millage rates have increased at a rate much more quickly than other districts. And so while it is fair to compare millage because a property assessed at a certain value in any district would pay the predicted amount by the mills, it's really not an indicator so much of what's the underlying financial management within the district itself. And I will tell you that Southern Lehigh has been fortunate in that among the Lehigh County districts, its mill has appreciated at a favorable rate compared to, again, some of our friends within the county.
Another